As the attainment of the Tao does not involve a continuous movement from error to truth, from ignorance to enlightenment, from Mayoi to Satori, the Zen masters all proclaim that there is no enlightenment whatsoever which you can claim to have attained. If you say you have attained something, this is the surest proof that you have not. Therefore, not to have is to have, silence is thunder, ignorance is enlightenment. Enlightenment is generally seen as something that you don't have your whole life, but at one moment you finally achieve it, and from that point on you are enlightened. Even when we tell the story of the Buddha, we speak of him trying to attain enlightenment for many years, yet failing to reach his goal. We say that the revelation came to him only when he sat down and meditated, and from that point on he was a completely different person. While all of that makes sense from our default point of view, the truth of the matter is much more profound, much less like going from point A to point B, and much more like point A, point B, and the distance between them being one and the same from the very start. Albert Einstein is famous for his theory of relativity. The theory exclaims that space and time, which are the main ingredients of our reality, are both relative. This theory is in line with what the Buddhist doctrine has been saying for millennia. In Buddhism, all reality is relative and essentially a creation of the human mind. One time, a couple of monks were arguing about a flag flapping in the wind. One of them said, "The flag is an inanimate object, and it is the wind that makes it flap." Another one said, "Both the wind and the flag are inanimate, and the flapping is an impossibility." Yet another monk said, "The flapping is because of a combination of cause and condition." The master saw the monks arguing, came up to them and said, "It is neither the flag nor the wind, it is your own mind that flaps." This story perfectly illustrates the Buddhist doctrine of all things being made by the human mind. It shows us that just as Einstein exclaimed, reality is subjective. From our earthly perspective, the Buddha was not enlightened at one time and enlightened at another point in time. But if time, space, and reality as a whole are illusions, the notion of achieving enlightenment, being the same as going from point A to point B, is found to be just a perception and not the genuine state of things. What is then the actual state of affairs? Was the Buddha enlightened from the start? Or maybe he never actually achieved that state? Well, in a sense, he was enlightened from the start, even though he called his experience an insight never before presented to one's mind, which implies a time relation, a journey from point A to point B. From the logical point of view, the Buddha contradicts himself, but in reality, the contradiction is only logical and not spiritual. In the realm of logical thinking, there are two states, enlightenment and no enlightenment. But at the core of existence, humans exist spiritually and not logically. And spiritually speaking, there is no such thing as either enlightenment or the lack of it. Instead of two states, there is only one. And that one state is neither the presence of enlightenment nor the absence of it. Those two seemingly contradictory states of mind are merged into one ultimate, profound state that can never be understood by the logical mind. This is the Buddhist notion of all things being one. As the Buddhist scriptures have it, the darkness of the cave itself turns into enlightenment when a torch of spiritual insight burns. It is not that a thing called darkness is first taken out and another thing known by the name of enlightenment is carried in later, but that enlightenment and darkness are substantially one and the same thing from the very beginning. The change from the one to the other has taken place only inwardly or subjectively. Therefore, the finite is the infinite, and vice versa. These are not two separate things, though we are compelled to conceive them so intellectually. As said before, there is no such thing as the attainment of enlightenment. If all things are one, then the lack of Satori is the same as Satori. Simply put, no matter if you are enlightened or not, you are and always have been enlightened. As said before, reality is a construction of the human mind. Right now you think to yourself, I am not enlightened, but that statement comes from the perspective that you currently have on the world. An enlightened person may say that they are enlightened, but as they say that, they understand that they are referring to their state of mind as they see it from their own perspective. When the perspective, or rather the attachment, is done away with, we find that the enlightened and not enlightened person are after all not that much different from each other. The only difference between the person we see as enlightened and the person we see as not enlightened is in our own perspective. In reality, the mind of the so-called enlightened person and the so-called not enlightened person is one and the same. A monk asked the master, "What is myself?" The master responded, "That is myself." After that, the confused monk asked, "How is it that myself is the same as yourself?" The master responded, "That is yourself." On the surface, this dialogue seems beyond confusing, but the real meaning behind it is quite simple. Let's replace the pupil's self with the ignorant, not enlightened state of mind, and the master's self with the enlightened state of mind. A monk asked the master, "What is ignorance?" The master responded, "That is enlightenment." After that, the confused monk asked, "How is it that ignorance is the same as enlightenment?" The master responded, "That is ignorance." The story is supposed to illustrate the fact that ignorance and enlightenment are both sides of the same coin. Normally, when we see the coin, we say that it can land on either heads or tails. But when we look at the coin as a whole, both heads and tails are a part of the same coin. Reality is the same as that coin. Instead of heads and tails, we see enlightenment and the lack of enlightenment, and we conceive them as two opposite things. But when we look at reality as a whole, just as when we look at the coin as a whole, we find that enlightenment and the lack of it are both sides of the same reality, just like heads and tails are both sides of the same coin. Enlightenment is looking at the coin or at reality as a whole. When we speak of understanding Zen, we think of either understanding it or not. But again, Zen is all about seeing both sides of the same coin as one. In that case, there is neither the understanding of Zen nor the lack of understanding. Both of those states are one and the same. How hard then, and yet how easy, it is to understand the truth of Zen. Hard because to understand it is not to understand it. Easy because not to understand it is to understand it. A master declares that even the Buddha doesn't understand it, where simple-minded knaves do understand it. When put in such a confusing way, the state of enlightenment seems even more distant and unattainable, but that couldn't be further from the truth. As we cannot conceive enlightenment logically, the only thing that is left for us to do is to simply keep on living our lives, keep on experiencing the present as it is, instead of trying to conceive reality logically, instead of trying to put yes against no. We need to realize that without no, yes cannot exist, and without yes, no cannot exist. Let's imagine a universe where there is no such thing as saying no. Every time someone asks you to do something, every time you get a yes or no question, you have to say yes. If someone asks you to do a favor for them, you would simply do it, and it would be so every single time. In that universe, the word yes would completely lose its meaning. It would simply not be needed anymore. If every time the answer is yes, then what is the point of answering at all? As you can see, in a world without no, the word yes is completely useless. You need opposites in order for reality to be whole. Yes and no, pleasure and pain, enlightenment and no enlightenment are both ingredients of the same reality. No matter how much we focus on opposites, how much we discourse on why yes is better than no, why pleasure is better than suffering, the bottom line is that all of those things, no matter how different from each other, constitute the same reality. Zen doesn't focus on opposites. It only focuses on the truth of reality as a whole. From our perspective, we may not be enlightened, but this is only our perspective, based on the dualistic point of view, and enlightenment itself is all about transcending the dualistic point of view. If Satori is by definition the act of transcending duality, and we try to conceive it from a dualistic point of view of Satori and no Satori, no wonder we do not understand it. As I said in the beginning of the video, achieving Satori is not like going from point A to point B. It is more like existing, while knowing that point A and B are and always were two sides of the same coin. The brightness is there all the time, even when the mind is thought to be covered with dust and not reflecting objects as it should. The brightness is not something to be restored. It is not something appearing at the completion of the procedure. Why do we want to achieve enlightenment? Is it to make us feel better? Is it to make our problems go away? Or to be able to use the law of attraction to get us the things we desire? If so, we are completely and utterly missing the mark. By doing that, we cherish the dualistic point of view. In enlightenment, you do not desire anything. You realize that no matter if you do or don't have what you want, having or not having something are parts of the same reality. The reality that we live through and experience every day. That reality is the only thing we ever need. Enlightenment is there and has always been there from the start. It is because of seeing enlightenment and ignorance as opposites that we are unable to see into the true nature of things. Satori merges all opposites into one, and it is that one that is the foundation of reality.